Good morning. I loved what you talked about the words. That is such a good little mini lesson. And then she sang, and now I can just go because I think we've gotten everything out of the way that we need. Anyway, today I'm kind of going to use the words discipline, restraint, moderation. Don't get scared of any of those. We're going to kind of mix that up a little bit. I'm going to start with a quote here. There is a passion natural to the mind of man, especially a free man, which renders him impatient of restraint. Have you ever struggled to discipline yourself from something? Had a hard time restraining yourself, whether it was you wanted to say something more, you wanted to eat something more, you wanted to do something more? We all have. Children have a hard time with that. Children don't really understand restraint. A child will eat ice cream until he's sick, or, she'll swim in a pool until she's completely pruned, I used to watch my kids fall asleep in the car after a party or kind of like a play date, and it would amaze me how fast they fell asleep, because to a kid, what's restraint? You play, you keep playing until you literally pass out, And, there's some areas in life where discipline may not be necessary, but maybe not. Because I kind of thought to myself, you can't love too much. You can't laugh too much. Can you sing too much or pray too much? Can you dance too much? Maybe you can, maybe you can't. We'll find out. Because I think it's a fair statement to say that pretty much anything that we do continuously, we can overdo pretty much anything. So when we overdo, what happens is we can cause problems in our lives of one kind or another. Because we're focusing only on one thing. What tends to happen is we lose focus of other things. But again, we'll expand on that. So what does it mean to practice restraint? And in a very simple sense, it means knowing when enough is enough, knowing when to say when. The Buddha said about discipline this: to enjoy good health, to bring true happiness to one's family, to bring peace to all, one must first discipline and control one's own mind. If a man can control his mind, he can find the way to enlightenment, and all wisdom and virtue will naturally come to him. So this is a state of consciousness we're talking about. We can only practice discipline and restraint from a consciousness that knows that there is abundance and plenty for everyone. Because if you think about it, the only people who want more than what they actually need are people who are living in a consciousness of lack and limitation. Kind of this mental world where, if I don't take it, somebody else is going to. When I was researching this idea of restraint, I came across an article by a psychologist. And she had kind of an interesting take on this, because she likened the lack of restraint that some people demonstrate as actually being a form of greed. She explains that when you want what you want when you want it, without regard to the consequences, and whether that's money or food or you want your opinion to prevail, whatever that is, we're in this state of mind that says, I want what I want this minute, no matter what. And if you have that attitude, you can kind of see how it can be a greedy kind of attitude. And, if you cultivate that too much and you ignore your, restraint, over time, your judgment becomes unbalanced. Because this business of not being able to restrain yourself is kind of a human thing, somewhat. And, when you're so caught up in that ego, me kind of existence, that you're restricting your freedom in a sense. You're kind of locking yourself into that ego mind. So what is discipline? What is restraint? Why is it useful? Restraint is actually an essential part of the way our bodies work. We live in a state of kind of a dynamic balance, okay? Things change around us from minute to minute. And to maintain our balance, we have to understand that there are times where it's great to reach for something, but it's also important to know when not to reach. And, if we reached for things all the time, if we ate all the time, if we worked all the time, if we doing any number of things, I guess, from time to time, you'd eventually be unable to function outside of that thing that you're doing, right? You'd be constantly doing and doing and doing, and you would never give yourself a chance to actually just be. So to be whole, it's important to remember that we need to refrain from doing things just as much as we need to do things. Now, most of you, I hope, I think, are familiar with the Old Testament story of the Jews leaving the bondage of Egypt and heading out into the Promised Land. And during their journey, God provided for them, and He provided sustenance for them in the form of manna, which is kind of like a grain. And that was provided for everybody each day. There was plenty for everyone to eat, okay? But there were people in that group that thought they were afraid, and they thought, I'm not going to have enough for tomorrow. So they decided they're going to hoard some of this manna away. They're going to put it away for the next day or the next time they were hungry. But unfortunately for them, when they went back to get it, it was spoiled. It was no longer edible. And not only did they not practice restraint, but because they were a little bit greedy, they also showed a lack of faith that God would provide for them, right? So restraint is a natural way to care for our well-being in our mind, in our bodies, and in our affairs. Now, restraint arises naturally as a kind of a pause, okay? It's a pause between actions. I mean, think about it. We breathe in, and before we breathe out, there's actually a pause, okay? So join me here. I want you to do an inhale and an exhale, but I want you to kind of feel that pause in between, okay? So we breathe in, kind of a little bit of a pause, and okay. So our bodies know how to pause, and they know how to stop before performing the next task. And in that really short, you probably barely perceptible little pause there, you create a space where in that moment you're aware and you can consider the results of a particular action before you choose to take it. And my husband made a really great point last night. I was going over some of these ideas, and he said to me, when you think about it, that pause, and we were likening it to having like cupcakes on a table, and heading over for those cupcakes and but having that pause, and then maybe possibly taking your hand back. And he was kind of giving me this example to show me. He said, really, that little pause, you already have a success there. If you're able to even identify that you've paused, you're already one step towards success in restraint, really, because you didn't just go for it. You paused. So that pause is very important. So because when you wait a moment, the actions that you then take are based on a deeper awareness of what will be beneficial to us and to all that's concerned. So with this pause, we're not rushed, and we just kind of relax into it. And again, remember, it doesn't have to be, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to wait for 30 seconds. It's not like this. It's just a pause. It's just, feel what you're doing. The value of restraint and the way it supports our well-being in a physical sense becomes very apparent when you're going through an illness or a dis-ease of any kind. Because when that happens, we feel kind of out of control, and that desperate me-first attitude starts to push its way back in there, and that's what begins to propel us. And the reason for that is because the human part of us, we want this immediate action and assurance that we're going to get back to the wholeness that we were. But recovery of any kind is not enabled by greed. It's enabled by restraint, by becoming more aware and making more thoughtful choices. So being patient is actually a form of self-discipline. Okay, so your pause there is also your patience. When you kind of proceed from this me-first position, there's no pause there. The ego doesn't know how to stop. The ego's like a train out of control, right? And So from that consciousness, we don't even have a chance to learn what we need to learn as we're going through something, because we're just kind of rushing on through. And if you're ill, you could very well injure yourself further in the process by not pausing and kind of looking at your situation and figuring out a way to spiritually handle that. I wanted to give you an example of this because it's kind of a big subject. A year or so ago, many of you probably know that I was training for what would have been my first half marathon. And during my training, I injured my hip. And I tried to continue. I was in pain, but I kept trying to continue. And soon enough, I realized, you know what? If I didn't back off, I could be faced with kind of a hip issue for my life. Now, you guys have to understand how much I really wanted this. Some of you were with me during this. I put a lot of time into this. I put a lot of training into this. I had paid money to be in this race. I had worked my way up into my training where I actually ran 8.5 miles one day, and I thought 13.1, piece of cake. I was so confident. I was so excited. But I came to realize that if I continued the way I was, it was madness. It was really just madness. And it was all about my ego. And I started to think, I told people I'm running in this race. I paid this entry fee. I had a girl running with me. I didn't want to let her down. And I prayed about it, and I had to ask, is running this marathon and risking injury, is it worth the coveted 13.1 sticker that I wanted to put on my truck? And the Christ within me, not my ego, knew that the answer was no. So I had to back off. I had to restrain myself from the temptation to keep training no matter what. I had to kind of take that pause, think it over, and I backed out of the race, which was not easy. And with the prayer and 3 months of physical therapy and the passage of time, my hip is healed. And as tempted as I was so tempted the next year, I got the email, to sign up again for it, and I'm thinking, I feel good now, right? And it took discipline. It took me, bring yourself back, remember why you didn't do it before, and I really just had to accept the fact that my body could do what it could do, and I deleted that email, and that's what I did. So did I lose anything by practicing restraint? No. By knowing that enough was enough, I might have lost a couple of bucks. I don't have the sticker on my car. But what I do have is I have 2 healthy hips, which is great because I take really long walks, and I love my long walks, and I'm able to do that with no issues. And so I learned a lot about not letting a stubborn ego override your common sense. And I think, we all learned that somewhere along the line. And the self-discipline that we're talking about is a state of consciousness, like we said. But it's not something that we only practice in the physical world. Practicing restraint in the physical world, not reaching for the cupcake, not running the race, that's not what it's all about. It's even more important to make this part of a spiritual practice. If we don't train our minds to have faith that what we need will be provided, if we don't seek wisdom and guidance when it comes to our possessions, if we don't use compassion before we speak or act, we end up becoming slaves to the ego. And we find ourselves back in this bondage where we're not really free. I'm going to share with you from Luke the parable of the rich fool. And it goes like this. Someone in the crowd said to him being Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me." Jesus replied, "Man, who appointed me a judge or an arbiter between you?" And then he said, "Watch out. Be on your guard against all kinds of greed. Life does not consist in an abundance of possessions." And he told them this parable. The ground of a certain rich man yielded an abundant harvest. And he thought to himself, "What shall I do? I have no room and a place to store all of these crops I've got." So he said to himself, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to tear down all my barns and my buildings, and I'm going to make bigger ones. And this way I can store up all this surplus grain that I've got. And I'll say to myself, you'll have plenty of grain for many, many years. Take life easy. Eat, drink, be merry. But then God said to him, you fool. This very night your life may be demanded from you. Then who will get what you've prepared for yourself? This is how it will be with whoever stores up things for themselves but is not rich toward God. So this is another case where an individual's first response to having more than he needs, store it up, right? And, you can do it. You can hoard things all day long. What's it going to get you? It's going to get you a whole bunch of stuff. And I always tell you, there's nothing wrong with stuff. God wants you to have your stuff. Not that there's anything wrong there. But the key to spiritual discipline is knowing to keep and acquire really only what you need. And then use those things. That's so important. Use these things. Because what are you gaining by saving things for a rainy day? And I put this into practice several years ago on kind of a small scale. And forgive me if you've heard the story, but I think it bears repeating. A few years ago, the story I'm going to tell you about is about dishes. I've been married 28 years. And back when I got married and you did your registry, you registered for your everyday dishes and you registered for your good dishes. Well, the good dishes that I was generously given, lots of them, were, this bone china Wedgwood with sterling silver around it and dee-dee-dee-dee-dee. And it was very elegant and for special occasions. But if you know me at all, you know that my middle name could be Casual. So, I don't entertain a lot, but when I do, it's low-key. It's not fancy-schmancy. It's not bone china dishes usually. But I realized, first of all, the ones I've been using is the everyday dishes. I'm thinking, these are shot. These are shot anyway. They've got to go. And I thought, you know what? I'm bringing out the good stuff. And I did. And this stuff, literally, these dishes had been wrapped for 28 years. From 4 houses. We schlepped them in boxes here to there. Make sure they don't break. And so we brought them out. And I use them every single day as everyday dishes. And I love them, and they're beautiful, and they make me happy, and darn what they say, I put them in the dishwasher every single time. Nothing's happened to that silver, and if something happens, And I guess it's also worthwhile to say that I don't have daughters. I have sons. Maybe if I had daughters, maybe they'd want the good dishes, but I don't think anybody needs good dishes these days. But paper works just fine, but I digress. So that was like a great thing. That was, with my jewelry. I decided to wear a lot of my jewelry I didn't used to wear. Why not? What are we saving? Enjoy your life. So I mentioned earlier that there was an idea that we couldn't possibly love, laugh, pray, or sing too much. But is that actually true? And in a way, it's not, because I kind of mentioned when you do the things you love, you also need to know the appropriate time for doing those things. And more importantly, we don't want to get so caught up in one aspect of our lives that we completely forget all the other blessings that are out there, and they are there. If you were to sit, for example, say you were sitting in meditation 8 hours a day. For one thing, I would say, wow, God bless you. And not that that's a terrible thing, but say you meditated 8 hours a day, and you worked another 8, and then you slept another 8. I think that's a day. Where are your other blessings? Where did you enjoy the rest of it? Do you see what I'm saying? So yeah, good things are great, but truly anything, we need to know when. We need to know when to turn it off, when to turn it on, that kind of thing. So self-discipline means that we allow ourselves to be guided and directed by God in what to do and when and how much to do it, basically. Self-discipline is also about common sense. It's about consideration of how our words and our actions affect other people, and about having faith that God will provide. I mentioned earlier about the disadvantages of hoarding, and so I wanted to make a quick comment on how this pertains to tithing. Because there are a lot of people who they believe that if they were to give 10% to their church or their other spiritual institution that provides them nourishment, that they won't have enough for themselves. And, that couldn't be further from the truth. Because, again, if you're thinking that way, what that implies is a lack of faith and maybe just a little bit of greed. Because the law of compensation assures us that it's just as important as receiving as it is giving to build a prosperity consciousness. The giving and receiving, it's a cycle, okay? And we have to kind of what we call circulate our wealth, and it'll come back to us, kind of thing. And when God spoke to us about tithing in Malachi, he said this, "Test me in this, and see if I will not open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that you will not have enough room for it." So let's take a minute. And let's first take a few deep breaths, and let's feel that. Let's be aware for a moment of that, just that small pause. So just breathe with me in and out a couple of times. Just feel what that pause is for you. Zig Ziglar said it was character that got us out of bed, commitment that moved us into action, and discipline that enabled us to follow through. Friends, we have come here to be disciplined. Nothing worthwhile can be achieved without a willingness to show up in life. In those moments when we are tempted to give up, we have a choice. Will we follow through? Will we believe in ourselves enough to carry on and push through petty excuses to whatever life's obstacles are, large or small? Discipline is worth inviting into partnership as we journey on our spiritual path. The most important thing that we can discipline for ourselves is in how we love and believe in ourselves, and how disciplined we are in opening to and receiving joy. The table of life is set before you. Sit and enjoy it. And I ask you to listen to this affirmation. Make these words your words. Obstacles and adversity have no power to defeat me. I am free from excuses and regret. I delight in being disciplined in the art of caring and loving myself and those around me. And in this state of consciousness, I take part in the feast of life. And so it is.